Okay, attendees is holding steady.
So let's go live then.
We are ready to go.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. It is Friday morning, November 4th, 2022. This is the monthly meeting of the Oregon Housing Stability Council. Wow, November already, but sure feels like an Oregon November outside, but hope everybody is nice and cozy inside. We're getting started on our monthly meeting, and even though we do have a very full agenda of items to deal with, it is a little lighter than our regular agendas. We're scheduled right now for adjournment at 12:30 this afternoon. And again, we will take a break at 10:30. So first thing up, we'll do public comment. We'll do a roll call of the council, then the report of the chair and report of the director. So I've got several things to share. I'll try to make it brief, but lots of good and interesting things. You know, some months ago, OHCS joined the National House America initiative that's led by our federal partners at HUD. OHCS joined the initiative in alignment with the agency goal of addressing our state's homeless crisis. Oregon Housing and Community Services committed to rehousing 3,500 people. That's 3,500 people by the year's end. And with the work of local partners, more than 4,300 people were actually rehoused. The agency had two goals: to fund the creation of 214 permanent supportive homes for individuals and families experiencing chronic homelessness by the end of 2022, and to rapidly rehouse 3,500 people by the end of the year. Now, doesn't this strike a note that we have heard at many previous meetings? Once again, OHCS exceeded a significant goal here, with more than 255 permanent supporting homes in the pipeline, and by rapidly rehousing more than 4,300 people. And a brief update on the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. As of October, OHCS has paid out more than $421 million in emergency rental assistance to 66,868 Oregon households. It was 1 week ago today, a day very much like this outdoors, that Executive Director Bell and I were in Lincoln City for the groundbreaking of a 44-unit complex known as Wecoma Place, being developed by the Housing Authority of Lincoln County in partnership with Stewardship Development and others. You know, Lincoln City, which is right in my backyard, already had a chronic housing shortage even before the Echo Mountain Fire wiped out 300 homes 2 years ago. And that's not the only great housing news out of Lincoln City. Work recently started on another LIFT finance project, 107 units, which will be known as 25th Street Apartments. More kudos for the great work of the agency. OHCS won an award from the National Council for State Agencies for the permanent supportive housing work. So there we go. And, you know, I jumped right over public comment, and my apologies for that. I was just so eager to share all that good news. So let me take a moment to encourage everybody to get ready for the presentation of public comment. And just one moment, please. Could we go to Director Bell's report and then come back for public comment, if you're ready?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do that,
Thank
Chair
you.
Hall. So I'll go through just for anybody of the public that may be joining. We've got move the order around just a little bit. So I'll go through my brief updates and then we will round back to public comment. We'll make sure that we have ample time for public comment per our normal process. Good morning. It's good to be in virtual community. It's good to see certainly all of the council members, and much appreciation to anybody that is joining us today. We appreciate you continuing to take the time to be with us in this space. I'll go through just a few. I won't have a couple. I'd be lying if I said I have a couple of updates. Just a few sort of core updates, just to keep the council apprised. So maybe just to riff off of Chair Hall's emergency rental assistance update. So moving aside from the program just a bit, recognizing that the need for rental assistance is still very real and non-abstract across the state. I also just want to make sure that we can continue to encourage any tenants to remain in contact with their landlords about any of the uniqueness of their situation. If there are any tenants that need information about their legal rights, they can find that information on OregonLawHelp.org, OregonLawHelp.org. And then they can also continue to utilize 211 as a resource. So either 211info.org or 211 online. So if you are a tenant and you are struggling to pay your rent and you want to know what resources are available, if you know somebody in your community that's struggling, I just want to make sure that those two resources are widely known. Also on the topic of ERA, Oregon Housing and Community Services were invited to participate in a broader national dialogue with the National Low-Income Housing Coalition recently, and a number of folks from the White House and a number of ERA grantees across the country a few weeks ago. I raised this because really the impetus of ERA has really sparked a broader set of conversations, a broader conversation recognizing something that isn't new, which is that there is a need for rental assistance, that there is continued need and a growing need to support people remaining stably housed. Obviously, we know that there's shortage of affordable housing. We also know that in many markets, including that in Oregon, wages just have not kept up. And the reality is there are a lot of individuals and families that have to make critical and hard and sometimes preventable decisions around bills that need to be paid and what's going to be prioritized. And so recognizing this is not only a state issue, this is not only a programmatic topic in conversation. This is about humanity and people's ability to be able to get by. And so as part of that conversation, really the framing of it really is to leverage and utilize ERA as a blueprint for really understanding what worked, what didn't work, and what do we want to absorb and improve upon as a nation as we think about the future of rental assistance. So when we talk about sort of very practical matters of reducing paperwork, making paperwork as administratively low barrier as possible, very practical things to improve the end user experience, was sort of the central focus of the conversation, recognizing that even though the pandemic, we're beginning to take some positive steps shifting out of it, the impact is still very real and still very present, and we do not want to lose sight of that. So to the extent that the council is interested in any of those report out notes, happy to share that. Also on a federal note as well, the Biden-Harris administration held a briefing this week to really center engagement around their work, accomplishments, and continued efforts of really serving the Black African-American community. So this is broader than housing. This is really talking about a broader set of economic issues, and also recognizing that as we think about from a state perspective, from an OHCS perspective, our own values of racial justice and wanting to make sure that we are continuing to, hold ourselves accountable, and recognizing that from our perspective, housing is just as much an economic issue. It is just as much a racial issue. And that is a statewide reality. That is not specific or particular to one community here in Oregon, and recognizing that we as a collective state, we thrive when all of our players are thriving and having access to their needs. So I just wanted to briefly acknowledge that that briefing took place. I have a number of lengthy notes, and that I'm happy to get out to the council to the extent that that would be helpful. It was a lot of really substantive and specific information that I found to be really interesting So happy to share that. And then the last couple of things that I want to mention, and then I'll turn it back to you, Chair Hall. So we obviously here at our monthly meetings have a lot of conversations around the housing needs, but we've been also broadening those discussions, recognizing that when we talk about rent burden, there is also the reality, a very real reality of energy burden and climate burden and water utility burden. I say all of those things because for an individual and for a household, that really is a pileup of barriers or cacophony of issues that make livability difficult and challenging in so many ways. Now, we brought this to the council probably some months ago during the conception of our first and really only water assistance program. So you may recall during the pandemic, we received the special allocation of a new low-income housing water assistance program. And so I wanted to give the council just a brief update on that, and we'd be happy to do a more substantive briefing at the council's request if that would be of interest. But today, as the most recent quarter presents, the program has served over 2,800 unduplicated households and have been able to restore service to about 130 households. And we were able to prevent the disconnection of service to over 200 households. And so I say that again to recognize not only the humanity of the issues when we talk about housing, but also recognizing that from our seat in the work that we administer, the work that we are engaged in, understanding that there's a broader social context when we do our work. And so we want to just continue to elevate all of the ways that we are of service that are aligned with the needs of the people of Oregon in terms of being able to get by, being able to afford access to very basic things. Obviously, one of them being water. And so I want to just acknowledge all of our partners that are helping to deliver those services during this critical time. And then the last thing that I will just briefly update the council on is some time ago we shared that we were asked to testify in Congress, and specifically in front of the Senate Finance Committee, and it was regarding private activity bonds and the role of that critical program plays with supporting production of affordable housing. And so just as a brief update on that, one of the things that we wanted to proceed and pursue action on coming out of that testimony and collective conversations was to really see if we can move the dial on some congressional action that would help us continue to leverage that critical resource, knowing that the housing crisis that we are facing here in Oregon is going to require the building of more affordable housing in all shapes and sizes across the state. And so we are both at the state level, and so many of our partners across the state are continuing to galvanize to really help make the case to see if we can push for that action, knowing that we've been able to make a lot of progress the last couple of years, and continued progress requires partnership and congressional action and help as well. So I wanted to just keep the council aware of that. And then Chair Hall, I promise this is my actual last update just to make the council aware regarding the emergency rental assistance program. We shared that our partners over at the Secretary of State had engaged in an audit, and the kind of core intention of that audit was to understand sort of the challenges, understand what worked well with the deployment of the emergency program, with the secondary intention to also be better prepared as a state agency and as an enterprise, so that if we were to receive emergency response dollars again. If we were hit with another emergency, we could be better prepared, and that all of the challenges, all of the opportunities are not lost upon us. So I wanted to just make the council aware that that audit is still active. We are still engaging with them. They are still engaged in a copious amounts of conversation and work in pursuance of that audit. So we'll keep you posted on that as well. So I think that is it for me, Chair Hall. I appreciate the extra few minutes. I'll circle back to you so we can get to public comment this morning.
Right, and before we get to public comment, which will happen in a moment, I'm going to ask that we have a council roll call just to verify that we do have a quorum to conduct business.
Thank you, Chair Hall. For the record, Councilmember DeFentorum and Councilmember Sandoval have been excused from this meeting. Councilmember Mena has not logged on yet. Councilmember Farrell.
Present.
Chair Hall.
Here.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Here.
Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Mena. Councilmember Rogers.
Present.
Thank you. We do still have quorum, Chair Hall.
Thanks very much. Now we'll roll into the public comment for today's meeting. And again, to go over basic ground rules, we allow people to address the council for up to 3 minutes. People are called on in the order that they signed up for testimony. We do encourage people to sign up ahead, but if you did not have an opportunity to do that and you would like to be recognized at the end of the scheduled public speakers, we'll provide an opportunity for you to use the raise hand function in Zoom and give you an opportunity right then. So let's get started. And the first name on my list is Ramona White. Is
Chair Hall,
Ramona?
I do not see Ramona logged on right now.
Okay. We'll come back to her and see, is Connie Hunter available?
I do not find Connie Hunter.
Neil Whitaker.
I'm here. Respected members of the council, I'm going to speak again regarding the conditions at the studios at Milepost 5, since we do have a little bit more information since last month. I received an email exchange between Guardian and OHCS dated August 2nd regarding kind of a request from Guardian to alter the order of speakers at this exact type of Zoom meeting right here. And I will quote Guardian's kind of request right here. Will our testimony be timed post the neighbor's testimony? If I need to coordinate this with someone else at OHCS, please let me know. And then OHCS answers back, I will request that your public testimony time be called after the neighbors, assuming they will also sign up. So it just looks like agreeing to manipulate the order of public comment to essentially allow the property manager to get the last word in. And this does help explain why we have these conditions here at the studios, because it looks like you have an additional method here for shooting the messenger. So in this sort of favoritism shows up again in another email exchange from July, and I will quote OHCS here. As I mentioned, the neighbors have requested that OHCS perform a full audit of criminal background checks for all current tenants. So OHCS is not curious about how we ended up with ineligible tenants. So after the neighbors had to uncover these proven errors, OHCS still has no interest in an audit to protect tenants from further violence. And the individual with the ankle monitor that came up briefly, I believe last month, is still living at the studios. So Guardian's response to this is a full file audit of all current residents has been done, and I confirm all have been screened and approved to our tenant selection plan. But they aren't required to offer any proof whatsoever that this alleged audit has taken place and or address whatever problems in the screening process that allowed ineligible criminals to supposedly slip through. Have those issues been resolved? It's a little disheartening that OHCS's policy is just simply to ask the incompetent party to essentially police themselves. And this in-house screening company that Guardian has been off and on in administrative dissolution with the state for a total of 48 months over the last 7 years. So they've been in administrative dissolution more often than they've been valid. So we're beginning to see some of the mechanics of the system that allowed this. What we had here was a solid artist community, and it has become a distressed building and a locus for crime. We're kind of seeing how that has happened. The asbestos that came up last month, since then and now, the DEQ did deem it in need of encapsulation and requested that repair. That original complaint about the asbestos was logged back in May. Don't know why that took so long. I guess I really think OHCS needs to take a really deep look at your words and actions around monitoring compliance here. I don't know why a simple review of paperwork regarding the auditing the criminal backgrounds can't take place. It seems like a simple thing to protect vulnerable tenants. Again, my point is these tenants did not agree to live directly next door to this level of criminal that we have discovered here. And I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. Richard Solian Jr.
Sholene, pretend the J is an H when you're close.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, the floor is yours anytime you'd like to begin.
So I'm actually a member of the Milepost 5 Studios Tenant Council that we've recently formed. And my point is, I was actually trying to come in last week, but I work, and so making this time around my schedule can be kind of difficult. So I was actually arrived late. Fortunately, I managed to make it before the public comment, so I apologize for being late, but I'm glad I was able to be here to speak. Going on again, what was just previously said, security has been a major problem. The doors have been unsealed on that building for over a year. They finally have gotten around to replacing many of the doors that were problematic, although the repairs have been questionable at best. There's one door that I have a picture of where there's a good half-inch gap between the double doors. You can see daylight, you see the buildings on the other side of the street through the doors, which would mean that somebody on the outside could very easily put a pry bar in there and pop those open. There's problems with people being able to use their key fobs to get in and out, which means that people have propped the doors open, which means that for all intents and purposes, the building is unsecured. We have the criminal element, which was the previous speaker alluded to. We've been promised all these upgrades, to security that seem to just be, oh, we're working on it. Oh, we're working on it. But the communication from Guardian and CDP has been, the only word I can think of is abysmal. We've asked for weekly updates on what's going on. We get none of that. We've asked for emails along with postings on the door. We get none of that. We have asked for consistent and detailed communication from CDP and Guardian repeatedly at every single tenant meeting we've had with Guardian over the last several months, and they have failed to respond. And it's just, I have no way of saying that they're acting in good faith because they have no evidence of that. So I am completely disheartened in the fact that they don't talk to us. They don't explain what they're doing. We live there. They don't. It's our home. Would you feel comfortable living in a home where strangers could walk in off the street? I have neighbors who are extremely traumatized by that very thing. And we've brought that up repeatedly, and we get very little feedback.
Excuse me, we are past 3 minutes, so if you could wrap up your thoughts, it would be appreciated.
Okay. I apologize. Basically, my primary point here is the lack of communication and the lack of responsiveness from Guardian is just making matters so much worse.
All right, thank you very much. Is Kaylee Tibbetts online?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. The floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you. The lobby ceiling at milepost 5 remains missing. The ceiling area is covered by plastic sheets taped to the support structure. I've seen and taken photos of vandalism to the plastic. People have been pulling at the taped plastic, exposing asbestos. Milepost 5 management is carelessly exposing residents to a severe lung cancer risk. And though the exterior doors have finally been replaced, the interior stairwell doors remain unsecured. Many swing arms are damaged, and not all of the stairwell doors have locks. Trespassers and squatters who slip into the building while residents enter and exit are often able to fully continue into the building. The elevator is not secure. Anyone who makes it to the elevator can gain access to any floor. The drop box for physical rent payments and work order drop-offs has been removed despite clear opposition from the Milepost 5 Tenants Council. The nearest walk-in payment system, which Guardian accepts payments from, is located miles away at Walmart. Many Milepost 5 residents, myself included, are living in poverty and or are fully or partially disabled and can't always easily travel several miles to make payments for physical or financial reasons. The walk-in payment system is more expensive than the Fred Meyer money order fees I've been using. This is an unfair burden. There is an online payment option, but I owe back rent, and the system will not accept quote unquote partial payments. And the poor and disabled residents of Milepost 5 are being discriminated against with this new policy of having removed the drop box from the on-site drop box. And there is a pile of garbage behind the fence in the southwest garden. I was told almost a year ago, after a squirrel died from being exposed to leaking gasoline from a gas can, which was out there at the time, that the garbage would be removed, but it has not been removed. There's been more garbage that's piled up since then, sort of a rotating garbage pile. Stuff goes in, stuff goes out. It never gets cleaned up. There's always garbage around the entire property and throughout the building. So what we need, the lobby should be shut down again until the asbestos threat can be fully remediated and an actual ceiling can be installed. It's ridiculous that they have a low ceiling that anyone can reach up and pull down the plastic and expose the asbestos there for people to walk by and do that, especially because the building is not secure and we get random people who don't live here, drug addicts, tweakers pulling at the plastic. The interior stairwell doors need to have locks. All of them need locks and working swing arms to make them more secure. The elevator needs to be made more secure. The on-site drop box needs to be made permanently available again to make paying rent affordable and equitable. The southwest garden area needs to be cleared of garbage, and the building and property need to be kept free of trash. And we, as Milepost 5 residents, need OHCS to actually do anything at all, please, to hold Guardian, OCP, no wait, that's not their name, CPD, what, CDP, that's their name. The people who own Milepost 5 and Milepost 5 in general, we need you to do your jobs and do something to get them in line with the law that they're supposed to be following to keep us safe.
Okay,
Thank you for
thank
your
you.
time.
We're at about 3.5 minutes, so we will move on to Tom Vincent. Is Tom Vincent online?
He is online.
Okay, can you hear me, Mr. Vincent?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, the floor is yours.
Chairperson Bell and members of the council, I'm speaking privately as a neighbor of Milepost 5 and have attended many of these meetings. The situation at Milepost Window apparently continues unabated, as described a month ago by many witnesses. Our Portland school teacher neighbors, who you heard from the last time, reports recently, quote, "There is still a lot of activity at the window, lots of people hanging around and being let in, cars stopping and occupants tapping on the window or waiting around the window, people accessing the building via the window or waiting to be let into the building. The car is still active. The occupant is often seen hanging around the window, being the go-between, cars with no plates dropping people off, et cetera, which I put into an email yesterday. Other neighbors report the same. Police have observed people entering through the window. This is the third wave we have endured over 16 months, which previously ended in beatings and gunfire. All this could have been ended by placing a guard in front of the window to prevent unknown people from entering the building or being let in through side doors. A similar guard outside was promised by community development partners in writing 5 months ago after violence occurred, and this has never happened. CDP does not answer any communications from neighbors or communicate in any way, shape, or form. OHP seems to have a long-term, reciprocal, and close relationship and could insist on security as well as closing gaps in the current security for the safety of tenants and the neighbors. Replacing some of the doors seems pointless without alarms and cameras. New doors are propped open and strangers let in, and this has been witnessed by many, many people, including the police. I am interested in hearing specifically and with great detail exactly what action you have taken in the last 30 days to end this dangerous situation. There were over 70 households in direct proximity to this building. Does anyone think they're going to sit idly by and continue to watch their formerly tranquil neighborhood, diverse working class neighborhood, and vibrant low-income artist housing devolve into a dangerous street funded by taxpayers' money? My feeling is that you are failing the tenants in the neighborhood, and we'll be watching with great interest what projects you fund in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Taylor Smiley Wolf.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. The floor is
Wonderful.
yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, and members of the Housing Stability Council. My name is Taylor Smiley Wolf, she, her pronouns, and I'm here on behalf of Home Forward this morning. Home Forward is the housing authority of Multnomah County. We develop and operate 6,500 units of affordable housing. We administer the federal Section 8 voucher program, and we administer many other long-term and emergency rent assistance programs. I'm here today to just make a few brief comments about the Market Cost Offset Fund. First, we want to sincerely thank OHCS staff on their successful deployment of this $50 million program. We know that the agency has received an unprecedented level of funding in the past couple of years, and that it has been a Herculean effort, to say the least, to scale up to deliver such a significant increase in resources. The department's quick response to rapidly increasing market costs kept the construction of affordable homes for thousands of Oregonians on track during difficult economic times. We want to say thank you for that. We also want to express our appreciation to OHCS for providing LIFT and Housing Trust Fund dollars to Metro to ensure the continued progress of Metro bond projects. This unprecedented interjurisdictional collaboration during a challenging time is an excellent example of the affordable housing system working together as one. Specifically want to thank Director Bell's leadership. In terms of the MCOF program, we just wanted to provide one piece of policy feedback on the design. We know that the program is subscribed, but we're hoping in the case that there are future programs like this, that it might inform the design of those programs. So this particular program was designed to support projects that experience an increase in construction costs. But the program excluded projects that issued their own bonds, and public housing authorities like Home Forward are entities of local government, and we have the ability to issue our own bonds for projects that receive 4% low-income housing tax credits. And the exclusion of these projects ultimately impacts the development of affordable housing that's intended to serve Oregonians as part of this one system. So the exclusion was not required, and the inability for Home Forward to apply to these resources was disappointing. In April, we closed on Deacon Court, a 187 unit project. It's a redevelopment effort where we're building new units for current residents to move into before we then redevelop the existing building to create even more homes on this existing site. As construction costs soared and interest rates climbed, this project faced a significant funding gap, and we requested $5.2 million in MCOF as soon as funds were available, but our application was rejected because we were the bond issuer for this project. So we wanted to highlight this because at the end of the day, we believe that we're all working together to build affordable housing for Oregonians, and just wanted to suggest that for future programs like this, if there are any, that projects shouldn't be excluded on the basis of who is issuing the bonds, because we're ultimately trying to develop affordable housing for and to serve the same folks. So again, we understand that this program is subscribed, and we just wanted to use the opportunity.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
we're past 3 minutes, so if you can wrap quickly, I'd appreciate it.
Wonderful. So just wanting to advocate that future programs don't make this exclusion, and we appreciate our partnership with OHCS and really appreciate the opportunity to give public comment today. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. How about Bradford Long? Do we have Bradford Long online?
He is online. Go ahead, Mr. Long.
Yeah, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, and members of the council. Let me set my timer so I see where this is going. Lots to report on Milepost 5. While I've heard quite a few comments from some of our residents and neighbors, I think to try to summarize that, I think we are working on, anytime we understand that there's an issue going on, we are addressing it as fast as possible. The exterior door project is complete. We are still very focused on security. We actually signed a new contract with a new vendor to install security cameras. I think that will probably happen towards the end of Q1. We still continue to have security presence on site for 11 hours a night, 7 days a week. So hopefully, while it might not, while we only have one person on site and they have a lot to cover, we do have a lot, as much coverage as we possibly can. Starting the end of last month, we also began funding resident services. We have Cornerstone on site once a week, and we're happy to see a very robust schedule programming coming up for the month of November. While there's so many issues that we could talk about, I think from a macro perspective, I think the issues that we're having at Milepost 5 are really has to do from just a general expense level. The needs at the property are significantly greater than what the property can afford, and some of the capital items are as well. So I think trying to take a step, all of the day-to-day operations, CDP is looking into ways to refinance the deal, free up some cash flow, and help maintain increased levels of staffing, increased levels of security. If we can, we will increase the levels of resident services as well, and anything else that it takes to meet the needs of our residents. We're also seeking assistance through ANOFA to improve various aspects of the community through the OHCS's NOFA, but all CapEx focused. And we'll do as much as we can for the budget that we have, but we are trying to figure out ways to upgrade the roofs, the windows, landscaping, common areas, and anything else that we can that we think that will be a benefit to residents. And I really would like to emphasize that my plan is also to increase the to modify the exterior landscaping as well, to kind of really show the community that that the area is improving. I think the time's about running out. So anyway, thank you for your time. Those are all the initiatives that we're working on, and we'll continue to push forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll circle back to see if is Ramona White online.
I still do not find her online, Chair Hall.
Okay, I see a hand raised for live captions.
Yes, that is in the panelist. I will take care of that. We do have one raised hand in the attendees, Adam Briggs.
Okay, Adam Briggs, you are recognized and you have your 3 minutes. Are you there, Mr. Briggs?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to read from a prepared letter and then ad lib a bit at the end. Set my timer here. Good morning, Chair Hall, members of the Stability Council, and Oregon Housing and Community Services staff. My name is Adam Briggs. I'm the president-elect of the Curry County Board of Realtors, which is in Southern Oregon, District 4. I'm a principal broker and owner of All Aspects Realty, and I'm also a licensed general contractor in Oregon, operating as AB Innovations LLC. Postgraduate school, I gained several years work experience managing Section 42 tax credit properties, both in Hillsboro, Oregon, and in Brookings, Oregon. And for the past year and a half, I've been serving our community as a volunteer on our housing committee that our county commissioners put together. Back in the spring of this year, I took the time to drive to Salem to meet with Oregon Housing Community Services staff to discuss NOFA funding opportunities that I could apply for to help bring some affordable housing to my small rural community in Brookings. As a result of that meeting, which was primarily to discuss the preservation of manufactured dwelling parks NOFA, I eventually was encouraged by staff to apply for the 2022-8 Veterans NOFA because the mobile home parks I was looking at were going to need extensive development work, which that NOFA wouldn't encompass. So that's why I was directed towards the Veterans NOFA. Eventually found a suitable piece of property zoned multifamily here in Brookings at a reasonable price, and decided to go with just brand new construction. And so I'm here today to make a request, or otherwise make a motion, that my Veterans 2022-8 NOFA application for the 10-unit Easy Street Veterans Apartments, which according to your stability meeting packets, for some technical reason, was not even scored. I'm asking to be granted a right to appeal to the OHCS staff decision to deny the application. I'd like to have it further considered, and I'm going to get into the why. Given that there is 19 million in the pot for this particular NOFA and only 5.7 million being allocated, I think I can safely speak for all Oregonians that this is a failure of the NOFA application process and not necessarily the fault of myself as the applicant. I want to point out last September 2nd, Sarah Padilla, who's the grant fund director, Habitat for Humanity, spoke to the issue of the application process, urging your staff to really look at streamlining the application process to assist organizations with limited capacity, which would be critical to bring more homes online. She recognized that you may not be getting a full subscription, that some of these NOFAs are undersubscribed, and here we have a classic case. I'm a competent applicant, filled out a full application. I don't know if I was missing the environmental one or some other technical reason that my application wasn't scored, but
excuse me, Mr. Briggs, we're at about half a minute over scheduled time. So if you could wrap your thoughts.
Sure, I'll wrap it up. So I would like an opportunity to have this reviewed. As I said, being that there's ample funds in this Veterans NOFA sitting in the pot, and that we have a dire need for housing across the state, but in particular Brookings has one of the highest populations of veterans. This needs another look. There's some technical reason why this application was not scored, and I would like an opportunity to meet with a minimum of 3 Housing Stability Council members and OHA staff to review what went wrong, so that we don't have these kind of problems happening in the future. We need to act as if it's a crisis, not if it's protocol. Remove these barriers. You have a packet today from LDCD, which speaks extensively to removing barriers to ramping up our housing production across the state. And anyway, this is just, it can be overcome. We're in a crisis situation, so I expect some follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Briggs. Director Bell, anything you'd like to touch base on with us on before we move into the business portion of our agenda?
Not specifically. I think the public comment stands independently on its own. I do want to just first off just appreciate everybody that came to offer their voice, perspective, and feedback to us. It does not go unnoticed or unappreciated. One thing that I will just, well, maybe 2 things rather. When we go to the affordable rental housing portion of our agenda today, we'll have some more substantive updates regarding milepost 5. as you will recall, we committed to making sure that we can reserve some time each month as we have pertinent updates regarding Milepost 5, that we will consistently continue to do that. So we'll make sure that we have offer a few substantive updates on the Milepost 5 topics that were brought up. And then I think also on that topic as well, we Council Member Mena, myself, and a couple of folks had an opportunity to meet with a few neighbors and one tenant recently from Milepost 5, recognizing that 2 to 3 moments of public comment is not nearly enough, particularly when there are challenges and complexities and just personal perspectives that need more time and human dialogue to be able to have. So certainly that was a helpful dialogue for us, the ability to have that level of conversation and detail and broader context, sometimes beyond what we can sort of extract out in the 2 to 3 minutes of public comment. By no means was that conversation, I think, ending in a place of resolve, and I think that there is consensus of that. There is a very specific course of action that OHCS is engaged in that is within alignment of our seat and authority and the things that we can affect, recognizing that there are, as you heard, a number of pressing concerns and challenges from a tenant perspective regarding the building, but then also some broader pressing challenges and things that are of care and concern to the neighbors of that community as well. So we appreciate the ability to have that in-person time with folks and making time for us, and then we'll have some more substantive updates during our ARH presentation. So I think that's it for me, Chair Hall.
Thank you, Executive Director Bell. Councilmember Farrell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I just have a comment, and I realize that sometimes there's reasons and things get out of order. I just also know that for people of the public to attend public meetings and take time out of work or have to be somewhere to have access to Wi-Fi, they rely on the public comment to follow the agenda. So I guess my comment is I just think as much as possible, we should try to stick to the agenda timing of public comment, just so people aren't, away from work longer, or who might have access. It just makes it a little more equitable for those folks.
Point noted and appreciated. Okay, now we will have the presentation from the Home Ownership Division, and Director Emma Shea Perfecto, are you going to be setting this up for us?
Yes, sorry, I'm right here trying to get my screen ready. Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, council members. I'm Emma Shea Perfecto, Director of Home Ownership, and today we have Cheryl Lyons just getting a few approvals from you guys. We'll be quick. Thank you.
Good morning, council members. For the record, my name is Cheryl Lyons. I am the loan specialist with the Oregon Bond Residential Loan Program. I have 3 loans for council approval today. Loan number 1 is for $451,668 in Deschutes County. Loan number 2 is for $332,859 in Jackson County. Loan number 3 is for $345,000 in Jackson County.
So at this point, are there any comments or questions from the council? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay, we've got a motion and a second, and if we can now have the roll called.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember Farrell.
Approved.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. So we'll move right on to the Affordable Rental Housing Division and Director Natasha Detweiler-Dobby.
Good morning, Chair Hall, Council, Director Bell. So before we get into our agenda items, I just want to take a couple minutes to follow up on some of the flags raised through public comment this morning. And so I'll start with milepost 5. Certainly want to acknowledge the frustration expressed from tenants and neighbors here and previously about both building challenges and broader community issues. Tenants absolutely have rights, and most certainly rights to live in a safe space. Our role at OHCS is to work through our owners and property managers to assure that those rights are delivered on. And so I am, we are continuing to work in concert with the owners and property management that are ongoing issues, as well as with a lens on trying to address core challenges with the property. And so I know a couple key things I do want to highlight. I think the asbestos concerns have been raised. I will just indicate that we are confident that qualified inspectors have been engaged previously and now around any of the damage that has occurred through recent water damage, around the needs to remediate, and that is prioritizing tenant safety and health. And so there are protections in place wherever anything has come up that needed to be remediated. Outside doors have been installed. This was a long process to get those doors and to get them installed. So I was very happy to see the pictures of them installed, with continued challenges around keeping those locked and secured, but that those are securely installed. And I am also happy to report that Cornerstone has been added to the property for providing resident services. They have several, I want to say more than a dozen, I've seen dozens scheduled events with tenants to both do meet and greets, food pantry, other tenant supports on site, to be able to really dig in on relationship building. And I'm optimistic that that's where this will go in terms of both property management really working to identify what the plan is to address the root causes of the challenges that they have at this property, as well as really engaging in a robust fashion with tenants to build trust and make sure that they can deliver on prioritizing tenant needs. So I'm continuing to be talking with them regularly about that, getting status updates of all of that work. It's a work in progress, and we are paying attention to it, most certainly. Let's see, we also heard this morning from Home Forward around the market cost offset fund, which makes me realize we have been in the process of finalizing the closeout report as projects have kind of slipped through, have gotten through construction closing. I know that we've been able to allow well over 2,000 units move forward, thanks to that state investment to address kind of last minute funding gaps as projects neared construction start. So I will commit to providing that report either in December or January so that we can see where those resources have been invested, and appreciate the feedback as we, if we end up with resources like those again in the future, to be able to have broader consideration for housing authorities. We also heard from Adam Briggs regarding the Veterans NOFA. You have shortly we'll be presenting 2 projects for funding recommendation. Adam does have a debrief scheduled with our staff on Monday to walk through the NOFA, the application, and the challenges therein. Surely part of what we've learned through this NOFA is that there was not adequate capacity to fully utilize these resources. So we're going kind of back to the board as we think about strategies for providing these resources again, and how we can expand both marketing as well as capacity investments in tandem with those development resources. So I will, again, he has a meeting scheduled. The appeal rights are within the NOFA. and do exist. So that is something that we will make sure he is aware of when we discuss that, and we can report back on whatever council might be interested to hear more about. And then, so I think that was what I had prepared. I don't know if there's any comments before we move into our agenda, Chair Hall.
Any council comments or questions at this point? Not seeing any, so let's move into the business side.
Great. So I will hand it off to Ty Dunson Strain to do this presentation, and I will get this up on the monitor here. Ty, no problem.
Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, council members. For the record, my name is Ty Dunson Strain, Production Manager here at OHCS. Today, I have a couple of projects for approval: Champion Park, Gateway Commons, Union Pacific Highway, and 27th Ave. Beginning with Champion Park. It is a acquisition rehab project in Tillamook, Oregon, sponsored by Wishcamper Development on our equity and ERJ rubrics. We have that it's working towards, and in addition, now we are the research group, we're now able to provide some demographic data, tenant level data, and comparing to the community and where the project is located. And we see that there is a population of Latino households and that is a little bit under the area for where the property is located, and with also a small portion that's identified as multiracial, and we just want to know, that these are self-reported, and 4.1% of the residents decided to did not respond, but the property is includes is about 130 units. The total with the total project being around 32 million, and there's going to be resident service provided by Cornerstone, and includes Guardian Management is going to be managing the property. The project meets two of our statewide housing priorities: affordable rental housing and rural communities, and the sponsors committed to a 20% goal of MWSB participation. And then the next project.
Yeah, Ty, just before you go forward, I realized so last month we had done the first poll. We managed to successfully use new data procured for our systems to be able to pull tenant demographics for these preservation projects. So we are, I'm just remembering Councilmember Lee was not in that conversation, and I hadn't followed up. So this is, just want to reiterate, this has been a long path toward execution. We're still wrapping our arms around it, and we'll gain practice as we move forward, but are trying to do more around being able to report out what we know about projects. And so for our preservation transactions, we're digging in that direction. And so so we're including it at this point in these presentations. We'll figure out how else to highlight that information and what is meaningful in doing so moving forward. But we're really excited about that. So sorry, Ty, I'll let you get back to the next project.
Sure. And next project is Gateway Commons. It's a 138 unit project. We classify this project as working towards as far as on the ERJ scale. We've had sponsored by Gateway Community Common Manager, and it includes includes 138 units, and previous received preservation funds. The total project cost is around a little over 43 million. Extensive rehab is going into the project and including rehabilitation of the 88 units to address accessibility. They are partnering with the local community action agency, and Cascade Management is the property manager. They've committed to a MWSB target of 30%, and it meets one of our affordable statewide housing priorities of affordable rental housing. And then we do have similar to the last present, we do have some demographic data. Just want to note that on the collection, 58% of the residents declined to respond, but yeah, we still see a decent sample size of Latino population that is looks to be higher than what is in the surrounding area, but with caveats that 58% of the residents declined to respond for this, and so we know we need to do better on the collection phase as we go forward. And next project. So next project is Union at Pacific Highway. It's a new construction project, and Corvallis. The total project cost is around 55, a little over 55 million. They did receive MCOF funds to get them to the finish line to get to construction close. There is in addition to our affordability terms, the city of Corvallis has contributed funds through their construction excise tax, so there will be an additional 60%, 60 years of affordability placed on all the units. The project is six buildings, including a clubhouse. The resident services will be provided through Community Service Consortium, and also Lynn Benton Housing Authority, and they are also have identified a couple of culturally specific. One specific culturally specific organization they're in conversation with, called Casa Latinos Unidos, and the MWSB targets around 20% through their general contractor, Annex Construction of Oregon. This project meets one of the statewide housing priorities of affordable rental housing. And then last we have for today is 27th Ave Apartments. It's located in Salem. They were previously awarded LIFT funds. The project meets our equity and racial justice metrics, sponsored by Equity Development LLC. The They are partnering with Mano a Mano and Salem Kaiser Coalition for Equality. And the property manager, Guardian Management is also in close partnership with Mano a Mano, and they for the MWS target, they Bodine Construction is targeting 20% participation, and this project meets two priorities: equity and racial justice, and affordable rental housing. And with that, I open it up for discussion. Questions?
Okay, council members, questions, feedback, comment? Councilmember Lee.
Chair Hall, thank you, Ty. Thank you, Natasha, for the presentation. And I just want to appreciate and shout out the data. I am always appreciating just how well, Natasha, you and the team listen to the feedback that the council and others are offering, and do your level best to get work done, you know, in terms of progress. Not that you're not working, you're fantastically busy. Where is the progress on these larger goals? And I just always appreciate that. I know at the point at which you all have had time enough to and space enough, you're going to come back and re-engage with us. So thank you for that. I love that we have this data. I think this is, you know, the challenge of doing good work is more good work to be done. What are we going to do now that we have this data, right? How is the knowledge that we now have? And there are some significant issues when we have, you know, 23% of the Native Hawaiian, Asian American, and Pacific Islander population in a neighborhood, and 3% or 8% of the population of the housing project reflected. There were a number of places where I saw a great disparity between the community demographics and who is living in the housing. I think we knew this. What are we going to do? And you may not have an answer yet, but I think that's the next challenge that's in front of us is now we have more information. Now we have more data. How are we going to use our new knowledge to reflect and impact our processes and our decisions, which isn't, oh, you're bad, now you shall not be funded. It is an engagement to say, do you know about this property owner and management company? And what are you doing? And how are you thinking about addressing this information if you did or didn't know it? And how are we going to work together to hold each other accountable on it? So I just want to say thank you. I think it's fantastic work. I'm very appreciative, and I will look forward to, at some point in the future, hearing what Natasha, you and the team have thought about and will come back to with us about how we're going to use this data now that we have it. But congratulations on getting it pulled together.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. I'll now recognize Councilmember Higginbotham.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I just want to echo Mary's comments, and I also want to just point out what an awesome mix of projects this is. You know, we're looking at urban, we're looking at rural, and you know, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to keep that mix of projects throughout the state. You know, all areas of the state are hurting, all areas of the state need housing, and this is just a really nice representation of what we are striving for. So thank you, Natasha, thank you, Ty, and everybody else that has had a hand in this. Very important.
You know, that was my thought too, a great mix of urban rural projects and also new construction and preservation. Councilmember Rogers.
I too would like to echo the great job and the mix of properties and all of that. The question that I have, though, is on the properties when you're talking about they're working towards the needs. I saw that there was a definition to explain what that is, but I'm just curious about what's going to be done going forward to have those other projects or future projects, I should say, get more to the meats as opposed to just working towards?
Thank you so much for the question. If it's okay, Chair Hall, I'll just take a minute to respond. I think this is a categorization we're hoping to rule out over time. I think a couple important things that I want to let you know about. One is that we had adopted, or council had passed a lot of fundamental changes for our 4% tax credit program that we indicated would be implemented into the QAP. That QAP is out for public comment now. So we will be wrapping that up, and inclusive in there for the 4% program is raising the bar on what does it mean to be able to meet equity and racial justice. So beyond MWSB strategies, saying that you need to really affirmatively have strategies that are directed toward racial justice in projects if we are putting our 4% tax credits in them. And I think there'll be learning lessons in terms of how we define and measure that, knowing that there are very different ways that can happen in a property. Whether it's just, whether it's in outreach, but really wanting to prioritize projects where you're really centering racial justice, both in having community inform project design, have financial benefit from the properties, et cetera. So I think we'll continue to grow that, but we have included in that QAP update deliberate language about that. The other thing I want to signal is that we had it's been a while, but we had talked with you about a capacity investment to be able to essentially fund services to be collaborative partners with our projects where they were like working toward, and where we would be able to say it wasn't embedded in it at the project inception, but let's see what we can fund to add to those projects. It's been a long road, but that NOFA, I believe, is supposed to come out as early as next week, or it'll come out this month. I think I have the approval date in my email. But so yeah, our capacity building analyst, Kime Leoka, has been working very hard to get that offering and a couple others out. And so I know that we've kind of crossed the threshold on that. So I think that's the place where we will be able to try to kind of identify interventions and be able to have resources to support those culturally specific organizations to do the work in that vein. And so I think I'm hopeful that over time, as we move forward, we are not actually reflecting projects in that working toward category, and that we are trying to put resources in place to make sure that any opportunities that potentially could have been lost are recouped through these capacity investments.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Anything further from the council? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve these 4 transaction recommendations.
So moved.
So, second.
Okay, could we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember Farrell,
Yes.
Chair Hall,
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham,
Yes.
Councilmember Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
All right, next up, Summit Gardens funding gap approval.
Yes, thank you. And just for the record, the Preservation Pool Award will come back with some refinements next month, I believe. And so here for the Summit Gardens funding gap approval, this is a bit of a collaboration between Affordable Rental Housing Division and the Disaster Recovery and Resilience division. So we have both Paula Anderson, our one of our closing and transfer managers, and Lauren Dressen, the Chief Recovery Officer, here to talk about this transaction.
Great. Thank you, Natasha. Good morning, council members, Chair Hall, Director Bell. My name is Paula Anderson, and I'm the Production, Closing and Transfer Manager in the Affordable Rental Housing Division. I'm here today to present Summit Garden Apartments for funding consideration. The sponsor is CASA of Oregon, and they're requesting an additional $1,800,000 in wildfire disaster recovery funds to go along with $1,650,000 in OAHTCs that has already been approved by Finance Committee to bring this project to close by its December 31st, 2022 funding deadline. This new construction project was approved by Housing Council as a part of the 2022 LIFT NOFA through the Wildfire Direct Funding Pathway. Summit Gardens will provide 34 low-income affordable housing units to agricultural farm workers and their families that were displaced by the 2020 Alameda and Abenchain fires in Jackson County. Complete detailed information is included in your packet beginning on page 32. Lauren Drezen, Chief Recovery Officer in the Disaster Recovery Resilience section, is also here, and we're happy to discuss any questions that you might have on the materials that have been presented. Otherwise, we ask you consider the motion before you. Thank you.
Any questions or feedback from council? Not, I'll entertain a motion for approval of this request.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second now. Could we please have the roll call?
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember Farrell,
Yes.
Chair Hall,
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham,
Yes.
Councilmember Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Great. All right, one more item, the Veterans NOFA Awards.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm here to present. Yeah, there he is. The Veterans NOFA Awards is Program Analyst Ed Brown and Amy Cole, State Development Resources Manager.
Yes. Hello. Good morning. I have a couple of slides that I'd like to share with the council. Let's just get that going here real quick. Okay. Sorry, bear with me just a moment as I have to reorient my screens. I have several. All right. Good morning, Housing Stability Council members, Chair Hall and Director Bell. My name is Ed Brown, and I'm a program analyst with the Affordable Rental Housing Division, and I work with Amy Cole in the State Development Resources section. This morning, I'd like to present for you our recommendations for the Veterans GHAP NOFA. So my primary duty in administering the General Housing Account Program, which holds a statutory mandate to allocate 25% of the program of the account to serve veterans specifically. That is our primary driver for this NOFA. As we collect funds into the account, 25% is set aside for veterans. We make that available through this NOFA opportunity. GHAP is primarily fueled through the document recording fee that's collected at the county clerk's office in each county of the state. Due to the housing boom that we've seen in recent years, we saw a record income for GHAP. And we're able to offer just under $20 million for veteran projects in 2022, which is also a record. This year, we received just 3 final applications for funding, combined request of $7,601,500. All 3 are in rural parts of Oregon. We're recommending 2 of those projects to the council this morning with a total request of $5,701,500. These 2 projects that we're recommending also both meet the OHCS MWESB goals. And so we are recommending both Freedom Square Apartments of Lake County and also Veterans Village, Malheur County of Malheur County. These projects would create 25 new net units for veterans of Oregon. 14 of those focused on serving houseless veterans, and 10 of those are also with permanent supportive housing units funded through OHCS with supportive funding. 5 of those 25 units are also family-sized units. All right. Highlighting some of the things that we like to highlight in this NOFA process from this year. We were fortunate to have members of the ODVA staff join our scoring committee again this year as they did last year. We're looking to take advantage of ODVA's offer to collaborate more in 2023. We know that there's a wealth of established knowledge of this population and of the networks within ODVA and veterans, sorry, networks serving veterans that we can better inform of these funding opportunities with their help. The next Veterans NOFA is planned for release early summer of 2023 with an updated offering of roughly $13 million. And with that, I want to go ahead and ask the council to consider the motion to approve these 2 projects, and also ask if the council has any questions for me about those projects or of the NOFA.
Council, any questions? Hearing none, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I've got a couple of questions and or comments. Ed, I wonder if you could briefly talk about how we define meeting, MWESB. It's different than some of the furthering categories that we talked about with the previous set of proposals. I want to appreciate that these projects are in rural communities, which I think is wonderful. Acknowledge the permanent supportive housing and the family-sized units, and just to say that in these conversations about veteran homes, we often forget about women, single women who are veterans, and veterans' families with children. And so we've got to, I think, constantly be, lots of time the narrative is, oh, it's a single guy. That's true. And there are also single women and families with children who have very different needs than a single male person who's going to live in the housing. And I want to ask, you don't need to respond to this right now, love that Veterans Administration folks are participating in the rating. I'm curious to know if that collaboration includes any discussion about financial commitments or commitments to prioritize services, or the provision of specialized services into these units and apartments by the Veterans Administration, because certainly that would be one of the ways that I would define a collaboration with 2 large funding entities would be, not only that we, that they come in to tell us who they think the right proposals are, and that they're coming in with actual concrete commitments of money, access to services, or additional help for these units. Thank you.
Thanks. Anything else from council members before we consider a vote?
I'm wondering, Chair Hall, if Ed might be able to respond to the question about what meeting MWSB is for the Vets NOFA.
Yeah, so in essence, looking at the projects in both of these projects have committed to the regional minimum of 20% of the project meeting the MWESB standard, in addition to the providing for us a strategy around how they plan to meet that standard, and also committing to reporting for meeting those minimum standards that we've set as an expectation.
Great, and Councilmember Lee, I appreciate the other feedback, and I think we'll be following up with that.
Right, are we ready for a motion now?
So moved.
Oh. I was trying to give you space, Barb, sorry.
My connection's weak, so what can I say?
Okay.
Well, we do have a motion and a second. Now, if we could have a roll call, please.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember Farrell,
Yes.
Chair Hall,
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham,
Yes.
Councilmember Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Lot of good transactions to process, lots of new housing opportunities opening up, and we are at our scheduled break time. And rather than taking the scheduled 15-minute break, actually going to call a 30-minute break, because after the break, we're going to have a presentation on the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis work, and our partners from DLCD are not scheduled to join us until that time. So we'll see you promptly at 11. Thanks, one and all. Okay, so
Megan, do we have, oh, perfect timing. I think I must have just summoned Sean, so that my timing was impeccable. Morning, Sean. I literally just as you were coming on said, hey, is our partner from In Your Face appeared? So we are in sync, Sean. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, sorry, I didn't know you guys were ahead of schedule, so I apologize for
No, you're just fine, and it's rare we're ahead of schedule, but no, you're all good.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's the first time I can remember in months and months and months that we were this far ahead of schedule, if ever.
Well, I mean, it's good to be here.
Oh, yeah. Looking forward to your presentation. This is Claire Hall, the council chair.
Pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you.
Well,
Resume if you're ready to go.
Yeah, let's resume the broadcast and we'll reconvene.
We're ready.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, once again, and welcome back to the November meeting for the Oregon Housing Stability Council. And we have one last agenda item today, and it is a presentation, Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. Now, who's going to introduce and set up this subject?
So Chair Hall, I'm going to offer just a few remarks, and then I'm going to turn it right over to our partner from DLCD and Megan Bolton to really lead the conversation and to dive us into it. So, so just as a couple of remarks for a backdrop here. So bluntly put, we know that from a housing perspective, the stakes are high, perhaps as high as they have ever been. And we have shared here at council, and we know that certainly from the pursuits that are articulated within the statewide housing plan, we have made progress. We have made a lot of formidable progress in increasing the supply of affordable housing. And that is not to be undersold or undervalued by any stretch of the imagination. The reality is from my seat, from our seat, in order to make progress at the scale that is needed across the state and to have solutions that are both comprehensive, representative of racial justice, and representative of some of the very formulaic issues that got us to these very issues that we're trying to untangle ourselves out of. We need system transformation, and that is what we need to go towards. Even with the scale of investments, even with all of the progress that is happening across the state, the reality is those investments are simply too little in terms of scale in comparison to what we need. That is just a fact. And that is not because no one is not working hard enough. It is just a reality of numbers and a recognition of that truth. And so what we find ourselves in today is not only a deeply and a profound shortage of affordable housing. We also know that the pathway to home ownership look and feels bleak. We know that there are rising home prices. Many of our communities continue to live and bear the brunt of segregation and the realities of continued displacement that so many of our communities face. Families have to move multiple times throughout a school year just to find and secure affordable housing, which makes it even more untenable for students to be students and for people to get by. And so we've talked a lot about council around intersectional work. That is what this is. We've talked a lot about this council around going towards transformational change based in our collective humanity and the data. That is what this is. And these recommendations, which the team will talk you through, really represent both ourselves and DLCD also as a state agency, not only wanting to point out gaps and deltas, but wanting to be formidably part of the solutions in supporting our partners and local governments in deploying meaningful solutions. We know people are working really, really hard in that, and there's more for us to do, and there's more for us to do to be of service to our communities. And these recommendations will be only recommendations unless they have the scale of investments that are needed to match it. And that is just a factual reality. And so that is sort of the backdrop that I offer to council as we engage in this today, which is it is going towards the level of transformation that we need, the collective we across the state to move towards pursuing progress from a housing supply issue. So I appreciate the willingness to hear that out, and then I'll turn it over to Sean and Megan to lead us to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Director Bell. Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, members of the council. For the record, my name is Megan Bolton, and I'm the Assistant Director of Research here at OHCS. I'm really excited to be able to have this time today to have you hear from Sean Edging, a housing planner with the Department of Land Conservation and Development, about these recommendations that Director Bell was just speaking about, that our two agencies will be making to the legislature about how to implement some really needed reforms to the state's land use planning system. For those of you who are new to the council, I do want to provide just a little background on this work before handing it over to Sean to dig into the recommendations themselves. In the 2019 legislative session, OHCS was directed via House Bill 2003 to develop a pilot methodology for estimating statewide housing need. At that time, this methodology was called the Regional Housing Needs Analysis, or the RHNA. So those of you who are here remember that, but we are now calling it the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, or ONA. You know, acronyms, they're the best. So OHCS worked really closely with DLCD and with our contractor, Echo Northwest, throughout 2019 and into 2021 on the development of that pilot methodology, and actually presented, I think I looked back 3 previous times on that methodology to this council. And that, again, this was a methodology really to address a history of federal, state, and local planning efforts that have harmed people of color, low-income households, and other marginalized populations in Oregon. The ONA methodology really supports changing that outcome and changing some housing outcomes for Oregonians by incorporating some methodological choices that really ensure the needs of the lowest income Oregonians are really thoroughly accounted for. A couple of big changes in this methodology were that we took into account the needs for the homeless population, for those experiencing homelessness. And we really looked, so, you know, rather than just looking at projections of future need, we really also took into account current underproduction and looked at that. And then really importantly, I think the methodology really disrupts the current system of planning for housing by incorporating more of a fair share approach that really accounts for the needs of the lowest income households in a whole region, rather than just allowing cities to sort of plan for the housing that matches their past development and income trends, right? So rather than a city just looking at its past housing production and its current incomes of residents and planning for the future of that, they have to look at the whole region and the incomes and needs of the region and plan for that. And we also are really working towards the best ways to provide the best available data on racial housing disparities. And that's a key piece that we've also continued to really refine as we've gotten more into the weeds on what kind of data are we going to be tracking to see if we're asking cities to set particular goals, what kind of then tracking are we going to do to make sure that they're meeting those goals. And so we've really dug in a bit on some of those questions. So DLCD was then tasked with evaluating that pilot methodology that we developed. And then in House Bill 5006, they were further provided with the direction to provide recommendations on how to incorporate this methodology into state and local planning programs, right? So methodology is just one piece of this. How do we, as Director Bell sort of mentioned, really then take that and create more systems reform? And really, we know, right, that undersupply is at the root of so many of our current housing challenges. As an agency, over the past 2 years, we've had historic levels of investment and production. I've been looking at a lot of numbers lately to help us get to some of these goal numbers. And, you know, from 2010 to 2016, we were funding about 1,500 units a year. And then since 2017, really with us receiving LIFT funding and some other resources, that went up to an average of about 4,000 units per year. And in 2021, we funded 5,500 units in that year for either new construction or preservation. So we are making these historic investments, but the ONA shows a need to nearly double that level of yearly production for publicly supported units, and just generally more production overall, right? Our current legislative ask will really help us continue to invest in communities all over the state, but there's a larger effort needed in the state to really focus on housing production of all types. And what's really exciting about this ONA work to me is that the intent is really around that, to find ways for state and local governments to work together to remove barriers and really focus on how can we increase production. We know that OHCS can't do it alone and that other agencies have a role to play in this work. And we've been really excited to be able to work so closely with DLCD on this and have their leadership on thinking through ways to really, you know, make this more of a statewide effort. And we want to be able to help our partners set goals and track progress towards meeting those goals and have the resources they really need to do that. So yeah, just very excited to have Sean here, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him to let him dig in a little bit more on these recommendations. And just one other, quick note, this is mostly really just kind of an opportunity for you to hear these and have discussion. There's no particular motion or anything, but we just wanted to provide you all the opportunity to hear this and have some discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Megan. And thank you, Chair Hall and members of the council. For the record, my name is Sean Edging. I'm a housing planner at the Department of Land Conservation and Development. I just also want to reinforce how much I've really appreciated the partnership working with Megan and her team. It's been just incredible working with such a dedicated team of people who want to see better housing outcomes for folks in the state. And I think, you know, this process it's been a lot, and it's been a lot more than I thought it would be even at the outset of it. But I think we're to a place where we're really starting to see some resonance in the priorities that folks have really expressed to us throughout this process, and really think that there could be a fundamental, you know, shift and path forward for building the types of partnerships and investments and relationships really that are necessary to really turn the dial on, you know, housing production and especially affordable housing production. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. I have kind of a presentation that is it's designed to give a, you know, brief-ish overview of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis recommendations, as well as some kind of context setting up and kind of describing, hey, what does our existing system look like? How has this historically kind of fallen short? And setting up that context, moving into the recommendations. The recommendations are presented very much at a high level. They're really intended kind of for, you know, a legislative audience, but they do drill down a little bit into more some of those kind of technical weeds that I think we can, you know, grapple with today and talk about, though know that I'll be kind of providing, right, a very high level overview of the recommendations writ large, just recognizing, you know, the constraints on time that we obviously have. But I really want to encourage questions throughout this process or throughout this presentation. Please feel free to raise your hand. I'm happy to kind of talk through that as we dive into it, because I know I'm not going to be giving everything the justice it deserves. But with that, let me dive into a little bit of context, just so you guys are aware of where we are at in the process. I think Megan did a great job of kind of setting up the statutory context, so I'll only touch lightly on that. But just so folks here are aware of the timeline, we were provided a statutory deadline by the legislature of December 31st for the final report. Really what that means when the legislature prescribes a deadline is you need to have that much sooner because the Legislative Fiscal Office needs it very far in advance. So realistically, we knew that we had to kind of have a draft ready really by the kind of the end of this month. So what we're shooting for, we've published a draft set of recommendations on August 31st. We had kind of an open comment period for a month on that draft. And of course, there was obviously a substantial amount of engagement that happened during this time and before this time that informed the report. But we've been kind of taking all of this substantive commentary and refining some of those kind of last policy details for a more refined report that we are going to publish on November 10th. That's a very significant sprint that we're making towards that publication deadline. But the intent of that draft is to really articulate some of those more refined policy areas where we've really heard need some kind of additional refinement. The Land Conservation and Development Commission, they're going to be reviewing it at their regularly scheduled meeting in November 16th, I believe. It's that Thursday following. And really, it's kind of a hit the champagne bottle against the ship as it leaves port, but also kind of gives kind of a last opportunity for any final refinements before we submit this to the legislature. So just so you're aware of that, of course, the draft recommendations are available for review on our website. Of course, we're going to be publishing a press release and refined materials on the 10th. So please keep your eyes out for that. So Megan did a great job of covering kind of the legislative direction that we have. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. Again, it was driven by House Bill 2003 in 2019, and we received follow-up direction, kind of recognizing there was a much more substantial set of policy questions that we needed to answer in relationship to how we implement Goal 10 that kind of warranted a deeper dive. And that's really what the legislative direction in House Bill 5006 in 2021 kind of directed us to do. It was to kind of study this methodology and make legislative recommendations on how you could actually implement it. And of course, following up, because the conversation around housing is never complete, the legislature had a lot of discussions around this kind of interface with land availability and the urban growth boundary. So they kind of had follow-up direction in the short session for us to facilitate conversations around this. We have this process for urban growth boundary adjustments, and that process can be kind of sticky. So what recommendations can we make to kind of facilitate that process and really support production writ large? So before I get into the recommendations themselves, I want to really emphasize that we have been, in partnership with OHCS and with our consultant team, doing a lot of conversations throughout the state. I note here that we had 6 focus groups and 14 regional forums. That really doesn't cover the full-on scope of the engagement that we've been doing with folks around the state. We've really been in significant conversations with, local practitioners, local elected officials, housing providers, service providers, market rate affordable housing developers, right? Just folks really all across the state and in a variety of contexts to really talk through this, kind of recognizing while the legislature direction was on the implementation of this methodology, we know that the goal here isn't just to measure housing need better, right? We actually want to see better outcomes. We want to see greater production of housing. We want to see greater affordability, right? Especially publicly supported housing. And we want to see more fair and equitable housing outcomes, right? Recognizing that, production is part of that, but it's not the only thing, right? And so, we really engaged in these conversations to get at that idea of, hey, look, we have some broader systemic things that we need to address if we're actually trying to achieve these goals. So what are the things that it's going to take? And really the kind of resounding themes that I think, we heard pretty consistently throughout all of these conversations, recognizing there was a huge diversity of specific and regional considerations that we needed to take into account. But really what resonated is this idea of, partnership at all different levels of government between local, regional, and state government to really have an all-in approach to addressing housing need and really being collaborative. The second piece is that there is a real significant desire to articulate that every section of government, every agency, every local government, every regional government, they all have a role to play in addressing the housing crisis. They're different, but we all need to really be stepping up and ensuring that we're taking meaningful actions to address housing production. And then finally, I think has been reiterated in this conversation, it's going to take substantial investment beyond just the planning, which is what we've focused on, right, in historically, and really get into this idea of, look, if we're going to build more housing units, especially, subsidized affordable housing, that's going to take very substantial investment that dwarfs, our agency many times over. And it really involves kind of a broader statewide conversation on how we source that investment, how we coordinate that among all these different types of agencies. And we'll talk about that in the recommendations. But in taking these recommendations to, the land use planning system, I do want to start really quickly with that statutory framework. How does Goal 10 work? What are the kind of aspirations of the goal, and how has it been implemented, and where are the shortcomings of that, the way that we've implemented that in terms of the outcomes that we see today? And one of the arguments that I maybe want to make is that when you harken back to the 1970s, when the land use planning system was established and Goal 10 was established, there was a pretty substantially ambitious goal that was articulated in the original goal, that really articulated that local governments in particular have a responsibility to plan for a variety of housing choices for people that live in their community. And obviously at the time, it really focused in on type and density, but the principle is you should have a lot of options and affordable housing ranges to live where you want and that meets your needs, right? And local governments have a responsibility to plan for that diversity. And one of the things I'll kind of make an argument for is the way we've implemented that historically has really mismatched from that goal. What you see in this graphic kind of below you, and I won't dive into too much excruciating detail on the land use planning system today, but what you see before you is kind of a simplification of what the current process looks like. This area in the blue here, the population forecast and the housing capacity analysis, this has historically been what jurisdictions have focused on to fulfill Goal 10. As I'll kind of talk about later, it's really kind of a land accounting exercise. To the right here, this area in green, this is the housing production strategy. This is something that was implemented in 2019, and it really articulates and recognizes, hey, there's a much broader set of actions that we need to focus on to actually facilitate production in our communities. And just to give you guys a sense of what these two documents do, the housing capacity analysis, and I won't dive into too much detail about this, is functionally a land accounting exercise. The question that jurisdictions are seeking to answer in this document is, hey, based on how much we expect to grow over the next 20 years, and looking at all of the land that we have within our urban growth boundary, do we have enough land zoned to sufficient capacity to accommodate 20 years of projected growth? And one of the things that I'll kind of emphasize throughout this process is that singular focus on land availability and zoning is not sufficient to address the full scope of housing needs that we see, and actually reinforces a lot of disparate outcomes between communities. As Megan talked about, right, this localized housing needs projection really reinforces, right, building past production trends and enforcing disparate responsibilities between communities and planning for affordable housing in particular. But one of the kind of emphasis, this emphasis on kind of land accounting that we've had in our system for roughly 50 years, is that we've really only focused in on one policy prescription when it comes to addressing housing need overall. We focus in on how much land do we have in our urban growth boundary, and if we anticipate that we don't have enough, we need to have more land. But we never actually think about, hey, what are the conditions necessary to make land ready for development and to ensure that it's actually supporting the needs of people who live within our communities, right? If you need to incentivize affordable housing, for example, the housing capacity analysis never focused on that. It never focused on housing needs for people with disabilities or housing for people experiencing homelessness. And it always consistently underestimated the amount of subsidized affordable housing that communities actually needed, right? And so, the consequence of this is that we really had this system that has kind of systematically underinvested in housing production and housing affordability, and has not really maintained kind of a comprehensive response to housing production writ large. And what we're hoping kind of through this full-on suite of recommendations that we are going to articulate in the coming slides is we're really trying to shift this focus to take a much broader and more comprehensive set of responses to the full-on kind of housing production barriers that exist within a community, and really take local governments who are on the ground implementing this direction, really putting them in the driver's seat to identify those pinch points where, you know, there are development barriers or barriers to affordability. And more so than that, articulating that the state is going to take a much more active role in partnering with these local governments to ensure that there's the investment, coordination, and accountability mechanisms all in place to ensure that we're consistently working to address these development barriers. I hope that the outcome of this kind of overall system is not just a singular focus in on just kind of land capacity and zoning, but really a much more broad system where we are, are constantly articulating policy, funding interventions to support production kind of at all stages of development and of course at all stages of affordability, with a particular emphasis on affordable housing production, and articulating, and very importantly, that all levels of government and all governments have some responsibility in relationship to the housing production crisis. So that's a really high framework, right, of like what our kind of angle is with these recommendations. I want to maybe take a minute to pause there on the kind of, I've kind of briefly touched on goal 10, briefly touched on maybe what we see as some kind of the systemic shortcomings of it. I did want to pause because this is, again, just a summary, right? Not a comprehensive, dive into what we see as maybe some of the shortcomings of the system. So just taking a minute to pause.
And Council Member Higginbotham, I'll recognize you.
Thank you. Sean, I was just wondering, in the earlier conversations you were talking about the forums, was Harney and Malheur County a part of those forums? And if they were, can you just kind of tell me how that happened, how that took place?
Yeah. So in specifically for Malheur, and can you repeat the other county? I apologize.
Harney.
Harney, yes, actually. So both Malheur and Harney counties, there were kind of a several sets of meetings that had happened. Some of these were kind of broader and more open to the public, but we also wanted to have very specific regional conversations with folks. So we did a few things to kind of, talk with our, specifically in Eastern Oregon, there to kind of kick this off and kind of make everybody aware of the conversations that we were having. We attended a conference, I believe it was the Eastern Oregon, I believe it's a women's conference. I'm not sure the name, but the premise was essentially to kind of talk through our partners in Eastern Oregon about the idea of having much greater state partnership and support, specifically for kind of some rural communities where housing production is often constrained as a result of a lot of different kind of market forces. And to really talk through, hey, what are some of the things that you guys need to address and overcome a lot of those barriers? And we also kind of held these follow-up conversations, including specific forums, 2 specific forums related to kind of Eastern Oregon writ large. We've also been having kind of a series of individualized conversations with folks just in various areas as they've kind of wanted to talk through these recommendations. And they really have kind of emphasized a lot of this partnership and investment that's needed from the state level. And of course, right, this need, especially when you have these small communities with such limited capacity to like do housing planning, like they need a lifeline, like they need significant support from the state to help them like implement all of these different kind of policy prescriptions to help them actually produce housing on the ground, to have more flexible options to support, affordability and production writ large. And, that's kind of the substance of those conversations that we've had so far. And of course, obviously had broader conversations where, we invited them to attend as well.
Thank you. I'm not really familiar with the Eastern Oregon Women's Conference. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll check into that. No, I appreciate the comments about local control. Especially in smaller areas. We've been touting that we need local control for, I don't know, as long as I've been alive, probably and longer. So I do appreciate that and that recognition. And I'm just wondering too, were any local elected officials or city officials included in those forums?
Yes, there were. And we've also had heard from a lot of different local officials who've kind of reached out to us as well. An example, I believe, is John Hillick from who kind of wanted to talk through some specific concepts related to the urban growth boundary in particular. And so those were conversations that we've also had too. Yeah, but we also wanted to get the perspective in particular too from kind of the local practitioners who are on the ground. They're working to provide housing production, that type of thing. And, you know, we've seen a lot of barriers. I think one of the most kind of compelling examples I've seen is in the city of Pendleton. They're working on developing an affordable housing project, and they're running into, you know, they need all these various sources of funding in order to make something like that accessible and to make it happen. And what they're finding as they're trying to kind of find support at the state level is all of these disparate agencies who do a really bad job talking to each other, who all control these pots of funding that are needed to support production, right? And it's creates this kind of goose chase where local jurisdictions have to chase all of these different agencies to secure funding for, you know, even supporting subsidized affordable housing, which should be a priority, right? And our recommendations kind of really reflect like, hey, that's a huge issue. That's something that, you know, local governments, especially smaller ones, don't have the capacity to do, right? And that really calls for kind of a broader statewide coordination effort to support them.
Thank you. I'm having a little bit of a difficulty with my connection. So maybe I can connect with you in a different way, or Megan, and have some additional conversation about that. And
Sure,
I do
yeah.
appreciate that. And, you know, just want to point out too that, you know, some of our land use laws are really a barrier to us when it comes to production for housing. And I think especially in rural Oregon. And what I've heard my local officials say is that when folks from DLCD and other state agencies come out and talk to us, they can say, look around and say, yes, I understand what you're saying, and we'll take that back, but things never seem to change.
Yeah, actually.
Go ahead.
Yep. Sorry, Counselor. You'll see actually when we get into the recommendations, one of the particular recommendations, specifically 1.4, is specifically intended to give cities, especially small communities, a lot more tools around kind of land use planning, specifically to kind of provide that support that you're talking about, right? Less of the barriers and more of the, hey, let's help you achieve the things that you want to see in your communities. There's a lot of different examples of that, that we particularly in conversations with, especially smaller and more rural communities, we saw as pretty important.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate your feedback.
All right, other questions? Okay, excellent. All right, I'm going to continue on. All right, so I'm going to talk through each one of these recommendations in a little bit more detail coming through. But you know, while we have this kind of summary slide of the generally about 8 recommendations that we have in total, what I do want to mention is that recommendation 1 on plan for what's needed. These are the recommendations. You'll remember I provided the kind of statutory framework. We were given direction, hey, implement the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis and work on these issues in relationship to kind of land supply and the urban growth boundary. Recommendation 1 encompasses most directly that kind of statutory direction, right? How do we implement this methodology? What are the components that it should have? And how do we, you know, adjust the way we implement Goal 10 to better meet the needs that are articulated in that document? But what we want to emphasize, and what really the conversations that we've had that have reinforced this, is that if our goal here is to build more housing, affordable housing, work towards more equitable outcomes, it's going to take a lot broader and much more substantial kind of reforms to the way the state as a whole approaches housing planning. A lot of these involve conversations that are far bigger than DLCD in relationship to things like investment and coordination at state government. And really recommendations 2 and 3 are intended to encompass that, to say, hey, the state has a much more, like the state needs to get its house in order, right? We need to be doing a lot more to partner with our local jurisdictions for the purpose of achieving housing production, right? And so that is really what 2 and 3 are intended to get at. You'll notice when I get into them, they're much more nebulous. We kind of talk about the types of things that we know are needed, but we also recognize there's a lot of legislative decisions that have to be made here and are things that, you know, DLCD doesn't have to answer on its own because we're one agency, right? And this really involves a statewide conversation. So I just want to make that clear. I'm going to start with recommendation 1. This is where we have the most detail. And of course, things that most directly relate to the things that DLCD and OHCS directly implement. So let's start with recommendation 1. This gets into the first 4 recommendations. The first one is all about, hey, let's establish this methodology and use it to plan for significantly more housing than we are today, especially subsidized affordable. We'll talk about that in a minute. The second one is on this idea that seems kind of intuitive, but we actually don't have anywhere in our system, which is, hey, we should articulate goals, even if they're ambitious goals, and we should start tracking how we're doing and tracking our progress over time and tracking the outcomes that people are facing. Say, like, you know, how are people with disabilities doing in response to like affordability, for example, right? This idea of tracking outcomes and using that to inform the policies that we pursue over time. That's actually something that doesn't exist in today's system. The third piece is I've talked about this kind of goal 10 system that is really focused on kind of this land accounting exercise. And what we're saying here is, hey, let's emphasize production as the main thing that we're really focused on in housing production strategies. And let's facilitate this with state partnership and support to help local jurisdictions actually implement those policies, right? And then the last one, right, recognizing that there's this kind of, you know, process, right, for urbanization that we have in our land use statutes. And that process can be kind of sticky, especially if you're a smaller jurisdiction and you have a lot of limited capacity. So what tools and investments do we know that we can make that will really make that process much more straightforward and give cities a lot more tools to kind of, you know, make sure that they have land and that it's prepared for development when they need it. So that's functionally where we get at with these 4 recommendations. I'm going to talk about each one in the coming slides. So let's start with the first one. I apologize, this graphic is a little bit dated at this point, but we don't yet have the kind of refined graphic just yet. But the basic idea here, and this is something that I know this council has grappled with before, but the basic premise is we have this existing system of localized housing needs projections, right? This is where a local government, they take a population projection that is provided by Portland State University or the Metro if you're a metro city. And they use that to drive a locally driven analysis that's based on kind of housing income and need, the amount of housing that they would expect to see over 20 years based on local trends. There's kind of a lot of shortcomings of the way that the system is implemented in terms of like regional equity that we've talked about. But fundamentally, we're not planning for enough housing, right? We don't take into account the number of housing units that should be here today that aren't, right, under production. We don't incorporate housing for people experiencing homelessness as a consideration. And we don't think very critically about the effect that second and vacation homes have on the housing stock writ large. And that can particularly have substantial impacts in recreation communities, places like the coast or even Wallowa County. And, you know, there are instances, if you look in our current system, where you'll have jurisdictions who have negative housing growth over 20 years, right? And that should never be the case when you're in the midst of a housing crisis. And so one of the most basic principles that is kind of articulated in this recommendation is, hey, if we implement this Oregon housing needs analysis, we address a lot of these problems through this kind of, you know, robust statewide analysis. And we also reduce the local analytical burden that jurisdictions face because they don't have to do this analysis anymore, right? They really focus in on the policy. How do we translate the you know, housing units and affordability thresholds that are identified into this analysis into like the housing types that we want to see in our community? How are we going to plan? Where are we going to plan for, right? And really kind of shifting the local priorities on that policy making and decision making process rather than kind of the analytical component, right? So that's kind of the first piece of this recommendation, and use that as the kind of 20-year need that local jurisdictions respond. So I'm going to pause there before we move on to kind of the tracking outcomes piece of this. But you know, what questions do folks have in relationship to that? Again, I'm touching at this at a very high level.
Council, any questions or feedback at this point? Okay, then.
Okay. And one thing I'll also mention too, the consultant who worked with OHCS's team and with our team, Echo Northwest, has also developed kind of a technical report that's going to be appended to the final report that kind of documents some of these changes and refinements that we've made to the methodology since you all have last kind of seen it. This includes kind of better accounting for second and vacation homes, better accounting for a lot of these dynamics that we want to measure in relationship to like equitable housing outcomes is a pretty big one. But just so you're aware, that will be part of the final report. All right, let's move into the second kind of sub recommendation here. And this is, that kind of intuitive idea of, hey, wait a minute, if our goal is to improve housing outcomes over time, it behooves us to start tracking the outcomes that we see in our communities to inform the policy decisions that we make, right? And the basic principle behind this recommendation is to say, hey, we can use this methodology to articulate goals that we're setting, right? We want to strive to achieve these, be ambitious, right? And we know that we're not likely to achieve them, but what we should be emphasizing is tracking our progress over time. How are we doing on, total housing production in our community? How are we doing for subsidized affordable housing production in our communities? And, more importantly, we can look at all of these different indicators related to equity that can inform our policies, like cost burden in our community. How are people with disabilities doing? What does our housing mix look like? What are the different types of housing types that we provide in our community, right? All of these types of things that we can measure, that we provide to jurisdictions to say, hey, look, this is analysis that you guys don't have to do anymore, right? This is part of, you can incorporate this in your goal 10 planning and really, think about like, how does this information kind of inform the policies that you guys want to take to, maybe, incentivize production or address kind of equitable housing outcomes. And that's kind of the basic premise of this second recommendation, to start actually tracking and evaluating how we're doing as a state and at the local level. So I'll kind of pause here too. There's also some details that I'm not including as part of this. Yes, Councilor Lee.
Hi, thank you. Just a quick question. How able are we to disaggregate by race and ethnicity the equity related indicators?
Yeah, so there are data limitations that exist here, but one of the things I do want to emphasize is that this information is pretty much better than anything a local jurisdiction can produce on their own, because local jurisdictions have a lot more limited resources to do like really detailed kind of equity related analyses. But there are geographic limitations, and I'll definitely tag team Megan a little bit to kind of speak to some of those. But one of the biggest ones is the data that we have that's most readily available to do these analyses is what's provided by the U.S. Census Bureau. And without getting into too much detail, there are areas where, hey, if you have a high, constant, like a high population density, you might have better disaggregation ability than you would in, say, like more rural communities. But you are also able to get up to maybe the county level or to the broader geographies to get a picture overall. And so the basic premise of this is you can provide that data at the best possible aggregation to have confidence that the data is what the data is saying is correct. But there's a lot of nuance there. Megan, please, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think that's where we sort of landed on. We want to be as consistent in the data sources as we can be across the state. So in some cases, we're saying we can provide where places are larger and we have larger sample sizes, we can disaggregate further. However, I think, Sean, what you might want to also highlight is how much, we've been working, or you contracted additionally with PSU, with ATRAC on how we can also do better community engagement and community data collection through the housing production strategy process, so that sure, we might not always be able to get really disaggregated data from the Census Bureau in more rural or smaller communities, but there's other ways that we can collect that data and understand particular needs and then incorporate that into the work.
Yeah, that's actually a very important point. Thank you, Megan. Right, the data, you're always going to have constraints and limitations in the amount of data recommendations related to, like, hey, we have very bad accessibility data, for example, so we should work on that, right? With agencies that collect information like that. But more importantly, right, like, data is only an indicator, right? It doesn't tell you what's actually happening on the ground. It doesn't tell you the stories that folks have in your community, right? So there's a broader engagement process that needs to happen that's reflected in Goal 10, and we're going to continue to talk on this, right, to better represent, right, the kind of full range of needs in the community, and that's something that we're working on with ATRAC. Yeah, any follow-up questions here? Also, I'm realizing I think I have a few things in the chat. Okay. All right, I'll continue on. And I think I'll stop pausing. If you do have a question, please raise your hand. So I'll take a minute to pause. Otherwise, I don't want to, I don't want to waste y'all's time. So I'll just continue moving. All right, let's move to the third recommendation. This is all about, so you'll remember earlier, I kind of talked about this land accounting exercise that was kind of the historic focus for local jurisdictions. The way that process works is functionally you're kind of looking at the developability of land and trying to assess, hey, do we have enough hypothetical units on paper to, meet our overall 20 years of housing need? But that doesn't tell you whether land is readily developable. It doesn't tell you whether there might be, kind of some inhibiting market factors that limit your ability to produce. It doesn't tell you whether that housing is going to be affordable, right? Or able to be accessed by folks right in your community. And so one of the big kind of changes to the way that we see Goal 10 envisioning is we have this new document called the Housing Production Strategy. And essentially what this document is a game plan where a city, and it's required for cities above 10,000, but it's also available for cities below 10,000, where they articulate a game plan over the next 6 years if you're in the metro, or 8 years if you're outside of the metro. What are the full range of kind of tools, actions, and policies that you want to pursue to support the production of needed housing and work towards more fair and equitable housing outcomes, right? So it's a broad range of strategies. It extends beyond land use and just, land availability, and gets into a lot of things like, do we have infrastructure in place for the areas that we need to serve? Do we have strategies in place to preserve existing affordable housing, right? What are all the different tools that we are kind of pursuing as a city to promote the development of housing? And one of the things that we're saying as part of this is, hey, let's really emphasize that process, really kind of drive, like the point of Goal 10 is on those actions that we're doing to support production. And more importantly than that, articulating that jurisdictions are not an island, right? They need support from the state to actually implement a lot of these strategies. And there's a lot that the state can be doing, and we'll talk about this in future recommendations, to really pair that with the types of investment and coordination to help a jurisdiction achieve that. I think I've heard numerous examples of a city that have, articulated, hey, look, we have this land that's right over here, but we just need a sewer trunk line that extends out to here. But we don't have the funding to actually do that. And that's a perfect opportunity where the state, wait a minute, DEQ has funding to provide those types of sewer lines. We can establish, a partnership to help get that strategy implemented on the ground. So that's just a, kind of a rough example. But the basic idea here is really refocusing in the emphasis on production rather than this kind of hypothetical paper capacity, though that will continue, right? Because it's part of the urban growth boundary amendment process. So with that, I'll continue on into recommendation 1.4 unless folks have questions. Please feel free to raise your hands if you do. All right. And so recognizing, right, that there is an interface here, right? If our goal is to build a lot more housing, part of that equation is ensuring that we have available land that's ready for development, to ensure that that land is ready to go. It's served with infrastructure. It's annexed into, local jurisdictions. It is primed and ready for development. And to ensure that we are, making this process, right? We have this process for kind of urbanization that exists in the state of Oregon to make it more straightforward for local jurisdictions, especially smaller jurisdictions who have less analytical capacity, right? And really provide them a lot more tools, a lot more, funding, a lot more support to actually do urbanization planning in a way that really unlocks land and primes it for development. So recommendation 1.4 really gets at that. We kind of facilitated this pretty broad housing capacity work group process where we kind of, talk through a lot of these issues. It turns out there's actually a lot of agreement from people who would ordinarily really kind of disagree with each other on ways that we can make this process more straightforward and really support smaller communities in particular that really relate to reducing a lot of the analytical burden that jurisdictions face in pursuing UGB amendments, providing a lot more flexible tools to, discount land that's not likely to be developed, or, options to kind of take land that's not really developable and kind of trading it for land that is more developable. And then just providing all the funding and support that's needed to actually support that work that jurisdictions take on. right? So there's kind of a variety of strategies. We've identified about 9 of them so far that can really kind of help facilitate, right, the timely expansions of urban growth boundaries when a need is identified. And of course, really just providing that support and that assistance to local jurisdictions to really provide them a lot of options and paths forward. All right, so with that, just going to pause really quickly for any questions, and then I'm going to move into recommendations 2 and 3. All right, let's continue on. All right, so what recommendation 2 gets at is the idea that if our goal here is to actually achieve greater production over time and to achieve more equitable outcomes, that is going to take some pretty explicit, direction investment from the state to actually make that happen. And there's really 2 major important things that we kind of speak to in this recommendation: investment, and the second being equity, which we frame as housing choice for all. So let's start with the first one. I think this is something that, I'm sure folks on this council have had significant conversations around. These are things that are resonating with pretty much everybody around the state, which is the idea that we need to be facilitating significantly more production. And this needs to happen at a lot of different levels. And there's a lot of different tools that we need to leverage to make this happen. And the basic idea is that the state really needs to step up with very substantial investments to support production in terms of things like, land acquisition, preparing land for development, making those infrastructure investments that we've kind of talked about. Turns out a lot of agencies have a lot of different infrastructure investment dollars coming in from the federal government. We should be leveraging that. The basic idea is we should be using and leveraging this funding to support, right, especially low and middle income housing that would not otherwise be built just by the market alone. And really kind of focusing in on those areas where, the market really does struggle to deliver, especially coastal and rural markets, right? Where I think we've definitely heard that there's substantial, barriers to development. So with that, we kind of recognize that this is going to involve a lot of legislative conversations around the kind of scope, scale, and how you distribute that type of investment. Thankfully, a lot of these conversations are already happening in a lot of different areas. So we anticipate this to be a pretty significant priority for the legislature in 2023. But we also recognize this is bigger than DLCD, right? This is going to take huge amounts of investment to actually meet the scale of need. Additionally, I've been talking a lot about production over the past couple of slides, but I think one of the things we really wanted to articulate is the goal here is not just building more housing. We want to make sure that people have more meaningful choices and that we're working towards more fair and equitable housing outcomes overall. So the housing production strategy really is kind of a first articulation. Hey, we should be working towards these outcomes that provide people more meaningful choices in their community. And what we kind of articulate here is we should really reinforce this priority in statute, because we don't actually state that anywhere, that we care about providing people meaningful options. And so the basic idea is that we articulate that and we continue this implementation to ensure that we're, not just thinking about this in the frame of production, but thinking like, are we providing or incentivizing accessible housing? Are we thinking about, providing options for people experiencing homelessness, providing affordable rental and home ownership opportunities? What are the different strategies that we're employing to do that? And are we directing investment to make sure that those things happen? So that's the fundamental basis of this recommendation. All right. And again, just recognizing time, I'm going to continue moving on to the third recommendation. And the basic idea here is that the state needs to get its house in order if our goal is to achieve production. You'll notice that and right now that doesn't really exist. And these recommendations kind of get at that. The first one that I want to articulate is that there are so many different agencies that I've talked about that touch on the housing equation. Agencies that make investments in OHCS on the subsidized affordable housing piece, DLCD on the land use piece. And we don't do a great job at coordinating with each other with the shared goal of housing production. So the basic idea is that we should be doing that. We should be establishing some type of kind of coordinating administrative structure at state government whose purpose is kind of coordinate policy and funding interventions in partnership with local jurisdictions, so they don't have to go to all these disparate agencies, right, for the purpose of supporting housing production, and really partner that we can address through kind of interventions in state policy and funding. So that's the basic principle that's articulated here. Obviously, this is going to involve like a very big statewide conversation around kind of the distribution of power and responsibility, and it's going to be a huge legislative question, right? This is not something that DLCD can answer by itself. And then secondly, one of the things we also wanted to articulate is throughout this process, we've heard pretty significant need for continued refinement to all of these areas of state policy. I've been asked to fix taxation, building code, condominium law, like all of these things that are absolutely policy areas that need to happen. But there's no any way coordinated document that ensures that the state is continuing to work on these policy interventions over time. It's kind of scattershot, right? And so the basic idea here is that the state should do that. We ask cities to do this through a housing production strategy. The state should be doing something similar, right? And they should be, continually working on these areas of policy refinement. And of course, the Metro, right? They have a regional role in coordination, and so do other regional governments. We should establish kind of a document that articulates that, right? What is this housing coordination that regional governments can do in partnership with their local jurisdictions? So that's basically the premise of this last recommendation. So with that, that is the full scope of recommendations. I did want to take a minute to kind of pause and kind of ask for questions. I know that we are over the 45 minutes, so I want to respect all of your time. Thank you guys for inviting me on to kind of talk through the recommendations today.
Chair Hall, it's hard to understand you. You're doing that thing that you were doing at the beginning. She's going to log off and come back on.
Maybe I'll jump in while she's doing
Go
that.
ahead,
Thank you.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the work. Thank you for the data. I have been on the council long enough to have been in the beginning conversations of this. So I know just how long and how many hours of your lives you and many others have contributed to this. So thank you. I have a lot of questions and comments that I would like the council to be able to dive more deeply into. So if we think about this as sort of a first step of, hey, the data's here and let me give you a really high, quick trip through it, I would very much like us to schedule some a significant amount of time for us to talk about what the role, if any, the council should play in this discussion, links to the next version of the statewide housing plan, a lot of questions about racial justice and equity that I am concerned about. We don't have the time. I would love for us to have enough time together to go deep, because I think we have to go deep. It's a lot of data, it's important data, and it's arguably going to set the frame and the path forward for the next, X number of years, perhaps longer than some of us, not all of us, will be engaged in this work. So it's important, and I want us to take enough time. So I don't know if that looks like a December agenda item. I don't know if that looks like a special session, but I think we need a lot of time to be able to just digest, reflect, and then talk about what we think the impact is and where we want to go with it. So thank you.
Hey, thank you, Councilmember Lee. And I'm of a similar mind that this is really significant, and it would be great for the council to have an opportunity to do a really deep dive on this document. But let me share right now just some initial impressions. As I've been reading over these last few days, I'm absolutely thrilled. I've been doing policy work on housing for quite a number of years right now. And first, it seems like it took years to get anybody really waking up to the extent of our housing problem, which morphed into a housing crisis. And this document says to me that the state is essentially recognizing that this isn't a temporary problem. This isn't something we can work on for a few years and then forget about. It's not even an Apollo moonshot kind of project. It has to be integrated permanently into the fabric of public policy. I love the new level of cooperation we're talking about between state agencies, the ongoing data collection, planning, funding, and action on an ongoing basis. So I see great things coming out of this work and look forward to learning more as things progress. Any other council members wish to be heard at this point? Well, I guess we'll say then, thank you very much for a great presentation, again, on some very important work. And I'm sure we'll be talking about this again.
Excellent. Yeah, Chair Hall and members of the council, thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean. All right, I believe we are at the conclusion of our agenda for today, just as we reach 12 o'clock noon. Executive Director Bell, any final words of wisdom for us?
No, I think our partners from BLCD and Megan left us with all of the wisdom to gnaw on. So yeah, just much appreciation for them and their leadership in this space.
All right, to council members, agency staff, the members of the public who have participated today, thank you all, and we'll see you next month.